Good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life. I'm your host, Jim Therian. The subject of tonight's show is about bird migration. Now, in doing my research for this program, I learned a couple of things, and I have a guest that's going to share them with you. So what I want to share with you now is that what I learned was most migratory songbirds are actually migrating at night. And I thought this was very interesting. What I also learned was that migrating at night is not without peril for the birds. And so my guest here tonight, she's going to help us understand what these birds go through for one specific threat. Her name is Meredith Barges, and she's in charge of Lights Out Connecticut. Meredith, good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Can you tell us about Lights Out Connecticut?
Sure. So Lights Out Connecticut is a nonprofit project of the Mononkatuk Audubon Society. We started out in February of 2021 to give people in Connecticut, mostly residents, businesses, local nonprofits, the chance to learn about how their lighting choices affect birds and to pledge online on our website that they will take some steps to reduce lighting around their home or business as a way to reduce the perils and impacts to birds. And so we are really a campaign or a project to try to build a coalition across our state of residents, but also we're seeing towns and cities that are joining as well. So now there's a Lights Out Greenwich. So that's an exciting development.
Well, I must share with you, I have a friend in Durham, and she has taken this Lights Out to heart, and she makes the husband go out walking the dog in the dark without any lights on. And so kudos to her. I won't give you her name, but she's in Durham. So how much of an effect does the lighting have on the migratory birds?
It has a large effect. We know that in particular songbirds in North America are both attracted to lighting and they're disoriented by lighting. And we know that since at least, let's say, the early 1990s, we've known that that lighting can attract songbirds into areas where they normally shouldn't go to. So urban areas, suburban areas where there's like a built environment where there's more risks to them. So the light draws them into these unsafe areas, and then they're at higher risk of things like collisions with glass, which is a leading cause of death for birds in North America. We lose up to 1 billion birds every year in North America.
That is a staggering number.
It's hard to even put that number into your mind.
Conceptualize.
Up to 1 billion birds, and we think that could even be an underestimate because that's a number that was published in 2014, and so that's even data from before even more glassy buildings have gone up. So we know that at least 1 billion birds are killed in window collisions, but there's other types of threats that can face birds that are drawn towards the light. And I will just say, the really famous example is the 9/11 tribute to lights in New York City.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so there's those two massive towers towers of light that they shoot up into the sky as a commemoration to the people who died on 9/11. And that happens right in the middle of fall bird migration.
Yes, it does.
Unfortunately, the timing of that is that there are thousands and even millions actually of birds that are migrating through New York City, and on that night they can get caught in the lights, and they try to monitor for it, but you can actually see the birds get caught in the lights, unable to break out of the lights. So the New York City Audubon has a relationship with the Tribute of Light people, and they'll actually dim the lights to let the birds fly out. So I just give that example to show that the birds are very attracted to the light and they get disoriented in the light.
They get confused.
So, yes.
And they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. About how high do they migrate at?
Well, they migrate quite high, at 2,000 to 5,000 feet.
Wow.
So we can't really hear them or see them when they're up that high. I mean, we're talking about little warblers that are only about this big.
Right.
They're tiny little songbirds. Some birds that migrate at night are larger, like the osprey, but these birds are flying at very high altitudes, and then what happens is they see the light on the horizon, and then they'll go towards the light, and they'll start to come down into
So
it.
over time, they descend
Yes.
to the light.
They'll get confused by the artificial light that shouldn't be there. They'll mistake it for a natural cue
Right,
in the environment.
Now, how many states are involved, or how big is this operation?
So Lights Out has been going on now since the early 1990s, and I think the first city that joined in the U.S. is Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So that's since the late 1990s. Then you have like different cities that do Lights
Right.
Out. They're probably the more famous examples are like Lights Out Philly, Lights Out San Francisco, Lights Out Baltimore, and then now New York City has a Lights Out. There are only about 4 or 5 states that have a Lights Out project.
Right.
And among them is Texas. That has a huge push to try to reduce lighting in that state. And Minnesota. So if, here we are in Connecticut, Lights Out Connecticut, we're one of the few states that has it across the state level. Realizing because our entire state is important habitat for birds. We're along the Atlantic Flyway.
Yes, we are.
So many birds fly through Connecticut. So many birds stay here to rest and nest.
Yep.
During migration, they also stay to nest. It's a very important state for birds.
Now, was there one person that said, this is a good idea, we need to start making this happen, or did it just kind of evolve?
I would say I would credit the people in Toronto. It's called FLAP, the Fatal Light Awareness Program. It's called FLAP, started by Michael Messer, who's a phenomenal bird advocate. And he's the one who really started off both linking the collisions with lighting and
Right,
also does a
right.
lot of monitoring of bird collisions. And he's really who started off a lot of the protections for birds in the urban environment,
Right.
which is less because we've had bird conservation in rural
Right.
but the urban bird collision preventions and stuff really kicked off, and I would credit
I
FLAP.
have seen pictures of people in the city going by with a bucket to pick up all the dead birds on the sidewalk
Yes.
from the overnight collisions. So it's good that we're starting to do something.
That's right. And we actually have a program here. There's only one really dedicated program here in Connecticut, and that's the one that's organized called Yale Bird Friendly Building Initiative.
Oh, let's hear about that.
Okay, sure. So that's based out of the Yale Law School, and it's a partnership with American Bird Conservancy and a few other groups, the Yale Peabody Museum. And they started off basically with 2 projects in mind. The first one is to do monitoring of the whole Yale campus. And they identified some buildings they thought were probably high collision buildings
Right.
that birds collide into, and including one that's pretty well known in the bird community. That's the Edward P. Evans Hall. That's the School of Management's all glass building.
Oh, wow.
And that building we've known for many years kills many hundreds of birds every year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all glass.
The numbers you're giving us is just astounding.
Well, it's really heartbreaking when you see how beautiful these birds are.
Right.
When you see how colorful and gorgeous, and to imagine them coming all the way from South America.
Yeah.
They're flying such vast distances to try to reach a safe place, and then they crash into a window and their journeys and lives are cut short. And it's very heartbreaking. So you have Edward P. Evans Hall, which is probably the most famous, but there's a few different buildings around Yale that are problem buildings that have
Well,
a
it
lot
would
of
almost
glass.
seem like any building at night would be a problem.
That's right. I mean, really, you can look at a building and engage how it's a threat to birds, partly by, how much glass it has on it.
Right.
So very glassy buildings are a problem, but then also how much light pollution. But this particular study, the Yale Bird Friendly Building's doing, their monitoring does not look at lighting. It looks specifically at it collects bird collision victims. So they go around, they do a track every morning in spring and fall, and then they are,
On the Yale campus?
yes.
Wow.
And they've found quite a few birds.
Oh, I bet they have.
Their report hasn't been published yet, but it's many birds. And then there's a second part to that project, which is a policy research, and I'm I'm a policy researcher with the Yale Bird Friendly Building Initiative, and so we'll have a report coming out looking at all different municipal, city level laws that try to create standards for birds, to protect birds in city environments.
Wonderful, that's really good work.
Yeah.
Now, about how many species are we talking about that come up through the flyway that get run into buildings and, excuse me.
So we have maybe like 300 to 400 birds species, and then of those, about 60% are migratory, and then of the migratory birds, about 80% of those migrate at nighttime. So we have, I don't know exactly what the number is of how many different species, but a lot of those are songbirds.
Right.
So that's all the beautiful warblers, vireos, they're kind of under the category of like passerines. You get a lot of woodpeckers that can crash into windows, like different cuckoos, yellow-billed, black-billed cuckoos,
Right.
even blue jays, and sadly, year-round, not just during migration, because the collisions peak during migration, but year-round you can get birds that are here, like the mourning dove is a very high,
Oh, wow.
unfortunately crashes into windows quite often, and then different types of sparrows, of white-throated sparrows, also a very common
Wow.
bird collision victim, unfortunately.
Okay.
And so those, we can have those year-round, but really we see the peaks in collisions right when all the throngs of birds start coming through, and then unfortunately, yeah.
Well,
they crash in.
it's nice that, people like yourself are trying to make a difference to kind of stop the I guess, the slaughter or the killing, I guess. We're going to look at some videos now. So we have some videos, 2 videos that we want to share. The first one you're going to see is of 3 migratory birds. And just to give you a sample of what we're talking about. And of course, just like Meredith said, there's hundreds more, but we just got videos of these 3. And then after that, there's some night videos that we're going to look at, and we'll be talking about the night videos. So are we ready, Max? Okay, so here's some night video with these blazingly bright lights that I guess confuse the birds.
Yeah, this video were taken by Lights Out Connecticut at different state-owned buildings around in our state. And these in particular are in Waterbury area. We're looking now, this is a bus depot. I think before we were looking at the Department of Motor Vehicle location in Waterbury. And this is just to give an idea of how overlit they are. This is nighttime filmed after 11 p.m.
Right.
Oh, this is the bus depot. So the standard, for dark sky, this is a courthouse, a state courthouse that's also in Waterbury.
And these lights are on all night?
Yes, so this could be 2 a.m., 3 a.m.,
Wow.
and this level of light.
Yeah.
The recommendation for lighting is you have light on where you need it, when you need it.
Right.
And we can see here that we're having a lot of light on when there's nobody there.
Right.
So you really are, you're using a lot of excessive light. And first of all, there was light shining in all different directions when you really want light that shines straight downwards.
Yeah,
That's
right.
the ideal scenario. The scenario would be not to have light at all if it's unnecessary, but that if it needs to be on, to face it downward and to put it on timers or motion detection. Those are kind of like the new technologies that we have, or that's pretty standard now for buildings, especially green buildings, is to have lights that will automatically dim. when no one's around.
Right,
you know.
right.
And then they come on when someone's there. That's for security reasons or because someone needs to use the building.
Right.
So I think that's the problem right now, is that we have a lot of like off, on, and we just leave it on all night without that kind of, nuance of like, when do you actually need it?
Right. I guess that's surprising to me that we have like courthouses fully lit at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
That just seems kind of silly.
It's unfortunate, yeah, for a lot of reasons. I mean, for the wasted energy, for the carbon emissions that are associated with that,
Right.
greenhouse gas emission, because we don't have a clean grid yet. But also the effects on humans. Light pollution has a lot of serious health consequences
Right.
for humans. So, and then birds and other animals, including insects.
So now, this law that we were talking about earlier, this law about shutting lights off,
Yeah.
that's just for state buildings?
Yep.
Is that enough to make a difference for these birds?
Well, those images that we saw earlier, those were all videos of state-owned buildings. That's the point to be made, that things could be done, especially with commercial buildings that they oftentimes are overlit. People's homes are also often overlit. The thing is that we know that with light pollution's impacts on birds is that it can also be building by building. If you turn off, like there was a study in Chicago at McCormick Place in 2016 that showed that if you turn off 60% of the lights at this one glassy building, the number of collisions at that building dropped by 50%. That's at one building. So if you turn off the lights, the birds won't be as attracted, they won't die colliding with those glassy buildings. So we know that's just one building. It can also have a cumulative effect of trying to reduce like sky glow, but we know that even if you can reduce it at one building, it makes a difference for the birds that won't collide with that building.
Right. And I would imagine, like if you get into a state building complex where there's lots of state buildings, you could have a significant effect on shutting the lights off.
For sure, yeah. I think so. I mean, so far there haven't been any studies in our state of the state-owned buildings to see what their impacts are on bird collisions or on light pollution. But we can say we know from other buildings that when you reduce it, you reduce collisions. And it would also set a really important example. Because if you have a state-level rule, we would be only the 4th or 5th state in the country to have a state-level rule to protect for birds. So that would set a standard that maybe then other cities could follow, and then other towns and things, and then other states could follow, because New York has a law. New York has a lights out law and other. So we would kind of join together with New York to be this 50,000 square mile corridor of safe passage for birds.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, so if New York already has it, if Connecticut joined, it would be this large
right
portion.
Up the flyway.
Exactly.
Right up the flyway.
And then maybe Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we could get some other states that could get on board.
So it's almost like a matter of lead by example.
Yes. At this point, because it's still early, we would only be the 4th or 5th state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if the state agencies are leading by example, then maybe that would motivate individuals like my friend in Durham and probably us to shut our lights off and stuff.
I think so, yeah. It would create a standard, that's to say, like, we know that lights aren't needed after 11 p.m. in most cases.
Right.
If they're needed, we leave them on, but most cases where there is nobody in any of those buildings, we don't need those lights.
Like 3 in the morning outside the courthouse. Those lights are probably not needed. Or at least they could be dimmed down a little bit. So let's talk about this this legislation, HB 6607.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So that's a law that would require all state-owned buildings in Connecticut to dim unnecessary lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So those are kind of like the peak times. And that's actually also parallels green building standards that you usually will turn off unnecessary lights after midnight in green buildings. So that's to save energy, like for energy efficiency. So this would actually be a year-round. It wouldn't just be during peak migration.
Oh, yeah.
The bill started off being during peak migration, which is classic lights out, which is, you start from, let's say in the springtime, April 1st through the end of May, so May 31st. Those are the
Right.
2 months of peak bird migration. And then in the fall, August 15th through November 15th, it's a longer span. They take their
Yes.
time coming back. They're in a hurry to get up to their nesting grounds, and then they take their time coming back in the fall. So basically, during those times is when we ask people to dim their lights for lights out. But this particular law would be year-round.
I was curious why the autumn window was a little bit longer than the spring window.
Yeah, they're in less of a hurry to get back to their wintering grounds.
Well, yeah, the males have to go up and set up their territory.
Exactly.
And all that other stuff.
That's right. They're competing for mates. They're competing, and then they're really on a tight timeline for
Yeah.
springtime.
Right. So
They have to get those eggs in the nest.
where do we go from here? What's the future of Lights Out?
Well, we've only been around for a little over a year.
Right.
And we have seen some incredible response from people. We have like 300 or 400 pledges, participants. You have a city now, Lights Out Greenwich, that's interested.
That's really important.
Yes, we have had some interest in Fairfield, Hartford, some different, so it would be very exciting if we have some state level law, if this HB 6607 becomes law, and then we have different cities that are participating,
Right.
and we have different people, and then that we can really get an awareness, at least to slow the increase in light pollution, because right now, light pollution is just increasing every year.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
And so even if we can just slow that,
Slow down a little bit.
that would have a huge benefit for the birds, because they are in massive decline right now.
Yeah,
birds.
that's,
We
yeah.
saw some images, those videos that we saw earlier, we saw 3 birds, and the first one is the wood thrush. That bird is in very serious decline, and that's a beautiful song that we hear in the summertime or, in the springtime. That's a well-known bird song, and we can't imagine a world without the wood thrush.
it would be a silent spring,
Yes.
to quote Rachel Carson.
That's right. So really, we want to be able to have these gorgeous birds that have been, a part of our natural environment for many millennia.
Yeah.
We want to keep them. They're
Yeah,
so beautiful.
It would be nice to keep them.
So that's really our goal, is to try to protect the birds in our state.
Now, I'm encouraged that you have Lights Out in Greenwich now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm encouraged because I have to think Greenwich is on the Gold Coast, and a lot of, wealthy business people live in Greenwich, and they might take it to their companies wherever they are, and just maybe a little domino effect would be could only be a positive thing, I would think.
I think so, yeah. I think, yeah, and actually we see there are communities around the country that have managed to do Lights Out very effectively, and a lot of times there are places that have a tourist aspect to them, or they're along the coast.
Right.
Just like most coastal cities are really prime spots for birds, and they're prime spots for this Lights Out movement. And a lot of times people want to be able to see the night sky. They want to see those beautiful stars at night. They
Right.
want to see the moonlight reflecting on the ocean and the water. And so it's in all of our interest, and I think, if people can realize what they have to gain.
Well, a couple of shows ago, I had on the director and creator of Pollinator Pathway.
Oh, nice.
And I think she was surprised at how well that program took off. And I suspect maybe this will be the case with Lights Out. I think people really want to do something, but in the case, sometimes they just don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're telling them, you can help simply by throwing a switch
Mm-hmm.
from 11 o'clock to 6 a.m. in the morning. And I think it's a good positive thing to tell people you can help hundreds, if not thousands, of birds migrating overnight that you'll never see, to help them do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I would like to start my closing here by saying one of the reasons I started this program, A Slice of Life, is to help people understand that there's a lot of things that they can do that maybe they just haven't thought about. And so I think episode 3 with the birdhouses, the pollinator pathway, and here with the Connecticut Lights Out, there are things that we can do. And it's not all the government's responsibility to make changes in our environment, in our neighborhood or state. And so, Meredith, I thank you for coming on and explaining this to us, that
Sure.
there is something we can do, and apparently it's as simple as shutting off a light, and or building a birdhouse or planting a native garden. So again, I thank you for coming on, and I think hopefully we participated in something that's going to be a lot bigger and better than both of us. So.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for advocating for the birds. Thank you for spending this time to talk about the things we can do for birds and the night sky.
I have anxiously awaited your arrival, and so I'm glad you came.
Thank you so much.
All right, so that's it. Thank you and good night.